Hey everybody, it's Chanchai, and this is first episode of this new format I'm trying out called, I'll probably call it Chanchai's Worldview, or Worldviews, and it's just basically a vlog. It's a video blog, and just going to talk about a few different topics while we're doing different things. I apologize, I'm not looking straight at the camera, I'm looking straight at the road because I'm driving. Right now I'm going through some serious traffic. It's a normal part of my day when I go to certain suppliers across the city. And yeah, anyways, so today is May 18th. It's a Wednesday. And I asked, I basically put it out there that I was going to be doing this segment, this series. And I asked for people to go ahead and shoot topics at me or questions. And I got quite a few. This topic today, we're going to talk a few parts, because I can imagine I can do an entire series just on this topic alone. But people in general asked me, Gray Fox RJ on Twitter, and Wazwaz, the owner of, or I think Wasus is how you pronounce it, owner of Arcade Stick Indonesia, the maker of Golden Stick and other really fine products. They both asked me about arcade scenes in general. Wazuz would like to see the Portland local fighting game scene, and I only represent a tiny part of that. It's very vibrant. So eventually I'll cover different aspects of that culture, because Portland is an amazing city for video games. Actually, there's every year we have a retro video game expo here, and we have not the best, but we have a very good selection of pinball machines all over the city. It's a small city, and that's kind of what works for that. So before COVID, you have a lot of different bars, a lot of different places, all having a pinball machine because it is popular enough. We also have a famous retro arcade called, gosh, my memory's kind of gone right now, but basically we have a great scene. We have multiple retro arcades actually, and so eventually I'll get to that, but let's talk generally about arcades today. So this episode's is for everyone that loves arcades, and I'm not a historian. I cannot say that what I say are facts, but they are my views, and they are what I've learned through others, some in education and some outside, right? So arcades is an interesting topic. And especially for a game like Virtua Fighter, which today is not going to be the topic, but Virtua Fighter really is a strong symbol of Japanese arcades, more than a lot of people know, because basically in the late 90s and throughout the 2000s, Virtua Fighter pretty much was the #1 arcade game in Japan, all the time. Whatever version was current would have a strong run, 2 to 3 years, and then a new version comes out and it's strong, and the new expansion comes out and it's #1 also. So you can't devalue how important Virtua Fighter is in the Japanese arcade scene, at least up until 2010. But let's dial it back and let's talk about arcades just for the sake of it. So let's even go further back than arcades, just for some perspective. Let's talk about the concept of the arcade, right? That's a place where people gather for entertainment, traditionally through kiosks. And one of the early visions, there's even before that there were visions, but let's look at movies. And Thomas Edison, who invented the light bulb, also invented forms of projection. And so what I did learn in my one of my degrees is in new media communications, and in the history of media that I learned, Thomas Edison actually did not, even though he was making films, he did not really have this vision that we have of the movie theater. He thought the movies, the little films, would be more personal and they would be shorter films. And so he was actually an advocate of, by the way, I'm not going to say Thomas Edison was the nicest guy. He was pretty mean. But anyways, he believed in the Nickelodians. He believed in those personal kiosks, like an arcade machine. You put your coin in there and you watch a short movie. He thought that was the way of the future for film entertainment. He thought you would have a bunch of different kiosks playing different movies, and people could just go to the one they want, pop in a coin and watch it. We know that's not the dominant form of movies. I think, I don't know the exact history of how we got into like the mass viewing, like the large group viewing experience, but I agree with it. But I would say that maybe vaudeville had a lot to do with it, because a lot of the early silent films starred vaudeville performers and probably directed by vaudeville directors. Even Buster Keaton, the predecessor to Jackie Chan, even he came from a vaudeville background, I believe. And so vaudeville is kind of like the live stage that you go to like maybe every night or once a week. And it's similar to what you have now in any major city when you're looking at community theater, especially comedy, but especially variety, or if you go to New York and you're watching the off-Broadway and the off-Broadway stuff, like the Upright Citizens Brigade, and of course London has also got an insanely rich culture of stage and theater performance. So that gets us to the, movie theaters ended up following that legacy. So let's go dial back to arcades again. Arcades are an interesting way to do video games. We associate them especially with the big hits in the early days when I was a baby. So like Donkey Kong, before that, of course, Centipede, Millipede. There's a rich history that the retro game communities could tell you. Well, many videos have been made about the classic arcade games. For me, I had always been wrapped up in video games from having an Intellivision before I could even speak, and an Atari 7200, which was a weird one, but played Breakout and Joust on that a lot. And then, even the Atari ST, which was like a hybrid. It tried to be a personal computer and a console at the same time. So, but we're not talking about my video gaming history. We're talking about arcades, but today we can talk about also how I've seen arcades growing up. So, I'm from Portland, Oregon, and Wunderland is probably the most iconic, in addition to Tilt, right? Tilt is a big chain. We didn't have Round One back then, but Tilt was a very strong chain that usually had their arcades in very popular malls, or at least big enough malls with a movie theater. And so you might have a Tilt arcade at the mall. It's a great place where they would, parents would leave their kids to play over there at a Tilt arcade. But in Oregon and in even San Diego, California, we had Wunderland. So what makes Wunderland special? Well, Wunderland was a chain. It's still around, but it's kind of altered a bit. But back then, in the 80s and 90s, Wunderland was a chain of arcades where you paid a flat fee to go into Wunderland, about $5. It was even less than that, but let's say $5. And then all the games were 5 cents to 10 cents. So your main coins were nickels. And Rayblade and I really, really grew up in Wunderland. I knew Ray since back then, and we had a strong presence at the one in Beaverton, but I know both of us had gone to many, many different Wunderland locations as children, or as teens too. And I would even ride my bike out to Wunderland quite a few miles just to go there, when I could. So that was really popular, and the Wunderland locations were basically separate stores out in the middle, not in the middle of nowhere, but their positioning was kind of wherever. They were actually pretty common. So for Beaverton, we had a few. We had one near the big mall, but in a cheaper space outside. And then we had a suburban location, is the one that Ray and I went to, and that one would consistently have like a good amount of fighting games. And Wonderland did have redemption games, and they were a core part of Wonderland, but I always feel like Tilt really like blitzed them up more. Wonderland kind of served like variety was really the spice at Wonderland, right? If you go to arcades that were doing really well near a movie theater or any dating place or even Tilt at the mall, they were the things that you would expect at any dating place. You would have racing games, gun games, anything that was simple, but anything that also justified that you couldn't have this experience at home, right? And that was a big deal, but it was an even bigger deal at places like that. And anything that could justify to the random casual persons that paying $1 or $2 or even $3 was like worth it. So it had to be something that was really immersive and something you really could not get at home. You could only do it out at an arcade, right? You can do it all at home nowadays. We're in an age of hobbyism where we can do like anything we want at our home if we can afford it. And even for those that can't afford the exact same experience, they can afford some kind of experience that gets it closer there, So we're at a very cool time when it comes to hobbies, even though the rising cost of materials is going to be a challenge for that. And we'll see this state of the global economies in the next few years. But at least at this exact moment right now, if you're into retro gaming, you can have the exact experience you want at home if you can afford it. But it's more accessible, more affordable, and more available than it's ever been before. Okay. Let's talk about another kind of arcade. One that Americans don't know much of. Okay. Let's talk about when I went to Southeast Asia, especially Thailand, and the experience of going to arcades in Thailand. So, in Thailand, it's actually kind of both. You have arcades, you also have public ways of playing consoles, or you did. Very similar to the PC game rooms nowadays, or the last 20 years. But, Thailand is not a first world country, and, a lot of its population is not that rich. It's only a very small portion of the population that is like what we would consider middle class and up, but so video games are really expensive in that with where the economy is at, with how much food costs compared to video games, it's an insanely luxury price. It feels like an insane amount based on your daily earnings compared to how much you pay per meal. Video games are insanely expensive even back then. And trust me, video games have always been expensive. Back in the old days of a classic Nintendo system, that was not cheap, right? When it was like between $100 and $200, that's really a lot, and we would quickly get to a much higher price later. But for Thailand, it's way out of reach for a lot of people. So the idea of public places to play console games, to play Famicom games, that has been really popular outside of the U.S. And basically, I think any third world country had a lot of these for every generation, or at least since Nintendo, since the Famicom. So Famicom is short for the family computer. It's actually what the Nintendo Entertainment System is called outside of the, basically for much of the world is the Famicom. And I would pay to play on the Famicom at department stores in Thailand. They would have like a section of the department store that's kind of the arcade, kind of not, but it would have a lot of TVs and Famicom units. And I pick the game I want to play and pay to play that. And later on, you see this play out in Thailand about by the late 90s, a really popular competitive game was Winning 11, which in Europe would be called Pro Evolution Soccer, and now in America we call it Pro Evolution Soccer Winning 11. It is Konami's franchise. I do think evolved from the International Super Soccer, or ISS or something, from the old days, but especially at the era of the PlayStation, the first PlayStation, Winning 11 was a huge hit. And modern FIFA, the core game engine, is as it has been since like about 2009, is basically based on Winning 11. It's influenced heavily by it because Electronic Arts is a studio that does do FIFA, hired basically a Winning 11 fanatic, and he completely changed FIFA to be very much a Winning 11 game ever since FIFA 09. And anyhow, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, in Thailand, we would have, I would see just tons and tons of middle school kids and high school kids and even college kids playing Winning 11 on a ridiculous scale at department stores or at their versions of the malls or wherever you could find pay to play on a PlayStation. And Thailand did have arcades, but they're, I think, similar to some countries, every once in a while they run into laws about arcades. And I'm not 100% sure on this is just an impression, but there were years where you could not see a single arcade after years of seeing lots of them. Dance Dance Revolution was really popular, fighting games were really popular, gun games really, really popular. Thailand even has famous people who are paid to show how awesome it is to play a game, which some of you have seen those videos. But there were every now and then there were years where arcade games were not around, and I don't know the truth. I'm just convinced that the government banned them, probably because kids were gambling on fighting games. It's something that I would feel the Thai government would do 100%. So at times, I could be way wrong. So if a Thai government official wants to set the record straight, I'm happy to hear it. but there were years where you just didn't see arcades, and then years you saw them back. But they've been back at least since the mid 2000s. Since at least like Tekken 6. So and I'm pretty sure before. But yeah, playing. Paying like by the hour to play at a place, that was very, very popular in places like Thailand since the 80s. So, but I would eventually run a place like that too. From 2007 to 2009, I ran a video game center. I ran 2 of them with a partner, and we had this was the PS3 era, the Xbox 360 era. We had a ton of Xbox 360s. We had a multicade unit. Very famous Twitch streamer, Lord BBH, friend of mine. His channel, you see him kicking ass at arcade games on his stream now. But back then, same thing happened on the multicade machine. People would ask him to show them how he would play a certain game that was a random game on there. And he would win it in like 1 to 2 credits, So it was always awesome to watch him just kick ass at all the arcade games, and that he does that now on Twitch, and it's great. So I ran a video game center. We had huge HD displays. It was a very nice setup. A lot of my friends who came from Korea, sorry, I'm focusing on the road. But a lot of my friends who came from Korea would compliment, like, at least at that time, the look and feel and experience at the video game center that I ran. So it was a real fun times. But I did call it quits around, because I felt that our business model was okay, but it wasn't as worthwhile. I felt I needed to go back to the drawing board and rebuild the business with a new business model if I want to make it worthwhile. Worthwhile being that it's very profitable and it's had a relaunch, and it's kind of and it's also making sure that all investors get paid pretty well and have their good exit strategy, and that we're on the path to doing better. the investor I was working with at the time, he didn't really want us to do that. I think because he was probably more in the mindset of preparing to sell it, you know. And so for him, the downtime was like not good for trying to sell the business, right? So, and for me, I was like, well, if I'm going to do this long term and keep doing this, I think we have to fix the problems, but we also have to relaunch and get everything on the right foot. And so, yeah, so I ended up pulling out and said, okay, I think I cannot move forward anymore. And at that time, my wife was moving to the States. So, yeah, that's just a brief history of that. But it was a lot of great times, and I think we did at least impact a lot of gamers' lives. And I had a wonderful time. But, you know, I did have a lot of weekly game nights there, keeping the arcade feeling, but the fighting game community feeling. Back then I got to do that with the fighting game community, the Halo community, and Call of Duty community. But when I did end up closing those two game centers, an amazing thing happened in Portland. Some of the most active fighting game community members pitched in together, and they made a venue that was specifically, it wasn't an arcade, it was a place to hold tournaments, and it was a place to have fighting game tournaments and Smash tournaments, basically like 2 days a week. And that was Best Bout, and they got a place that had a very low rent and low kind of, you know, it didn't cost too much to run, because they had their own day jobs, they had their own life. But this was something where they basically made the game room, you know, maybe like a poker game room, but they made like a video game room for the sake of streaming and holding tournaments. And really their form of, this is what we can do. We can't do full-time arcade, but we can we know that streaming is becoming more popular, and we know that there are fighting game players that want a tournament scene, and we're going to do that. And that's what they did. So they did that after I had closed my game center, and it was wonderful. It was a wonderful run for a few years. It's really hard to do that, but it was a pure hobbyist approach. But it's one of the most core things about fighting games that is important, is that a public place is incredibly valuable. It is probably the most important thing. We're going to enter an era where the online gaming is super vital, okay? But for like this real competitive scene and a local scene, and this experience that you only get, it's really important to have a public venue, not just a house, right? And I did say this back in the day too. I said the problem with doing a house is you can't really separate it from the drama, and it gets incredibly personal. People's things get stolen. They get stolen in both, but when you get stolen from someone's house, it's way more terrible. There are ways to enforce it and be very strict in a public venue, and you know, it's kind of important to keep the harder parts of these community events out of people's backyards, right? Just, you know, in a public venue, the players have more respect for the venue. They do have gratitude and respect for their friend's house, but then but you have to deal with a lot of social friction that has to be dealt with when you're doing sessions at someone's house, and there is more calls for being a little more exclusive, and people will complain about that too. But for the sake of safety and comfort, casuals at home, there's a lot of friction that can happen. So a public venue is so important, and that's why arcades are, whatever form the arcade takes going forward, is important, you know. And even online has to take, online provides a lot of wonderful things, but for me as a competitive Virtua Fighter player, the thing that's going to help me the most for tournaments is going to be playing in an environment that's like an arcade. That's number one. It's the closest you're going to get to feeling the pressure from the environment and the pressure from other players, the pressure from yourself. It's the closest you're going to get to what it feels like when you play at a tournament, and especially when you play a tournament on the stage. After that, playing on a stream does help a lot, because playing on a stream is a way more intense atmosphere actually than playing just casuals online or even just casual sessions. Casual sessions are great, but you do need this cultural element. You don't need it, but it helps a lot more. Pressure is what's going to help you be a better tournament player, and how to manage yourself through the pressure. All the things that come with it too, the noise, the environmental pressure. There's a social pressure. There is, and then again, the pressure for yourself, the adrenaline you get. And then arcades are also kind of tough because you gotta wait. Sometimes you gotta go through a queue, and if you lose, you gotta have to wait about 8 more games to get back on. If you have a lot of setups, maybe 4. Maybe 3 or 4. So it depends. Okay, but let's talk about some of the VF arcade scenes that I've learned to love. So in Portland, in Oregon, myself and Rayblade have often in the past helped build up the Virtua Fighter scene in Portland, and pretty much ever since 3 Dreamcast, where it was really small, and then 4 had a pretty good, actually a really good size. 4 Evo had a decent size. Different generation change at that time too, and then 5 we actually had quite a bit. And then Ray moved back to Hawaii, where he's worked over there. But for me, Final Showdown, I was able to build both a very strong competitive group as well as a casual group, or like an open group play. And we used places like Epic Gaming and some house gatherings too. Best Bout in the early days too. So we definitely kept events going in public places, and that allowed us to focus both competitive and just overall enjoyment of the game, and it was awesome. And I think because of that, there's still a lot of people that if I happen to show up at a session, everyone's really friendly. They'll make room for Virtua Fighter like right away. It's not something I'm entitled to, but it's something that they seem very happy doing when they know how busy I am. But when I am able to make it out to a session, it's the scene being incredibly welcoming to me, and also they love playing Virtua Fighter as well. And they also know that I'm happy to try to help them improve, and happy to give them what level of competition they want. So the feeling of community at a public venue is just unmatched. The online state of things. People have different views of that. I'm grateful because it sucks when you're not able to play because you've got a busy life. But like late at night you can play. Dennis 0201 has to play after work and after the house is sleeping. Jake Jung is the same way. And so that's what makes me grateful for the online. But we all love the arcade feeling. It's the thing that we want the most. Even if we can't have it, we want the scene to have it. So arcades are something like the arcade is important. It's always very important, and it creates availability, accessibility, and even levels of pride. So for fighting games, I think it's vital. I think offline scenes are incredibly important, especially for Virtua Fighter. I'll talk about that another time, about Virtua Fighter offline versus online and whatnot. But today I'm just rambling about arcades because I'm going down this trip of memory lane. And now to end this, I can say I like that there's been places like Round One, which is basically a chain of I would, you have the players have to push their local Round One to be able to repair their machines. If they can do that, it's wonderful. And so, I went to Seattle, and it has an awesome Round One, but I'm not from Seattle. I can't go to that Round One like every week, especially with my current lifestyle. There was a time when I could, and 5 years ago they had like 4 Virtua Fighter 5 Final Showdown machines. The problem was, or setups, the problem was every one of them had a broken part on their controller. The lever was broken, the button was broken, whatever. You couldn't fully play the game on any of the player sites, on any of the setups. And I do believe they would fix it. It just needs the players to be there, and the players harassing the staff to fix it, and then the players coming back to show that, hey, keep this in order, we're going to keep playing, But at the time that I went, Master Red had moved to Japan, and the strongest VF players that probably could have played on that machine were living further away. They were not near Seattle. They still are not near Seattle. But it's what it is. But I do think that the Round One arcades are awesome. Look at how the rhythm game scenes are enjoying that so much. And some of the Round Ones I've been to have an amazing library of fighting games. Just needs to make sure that the players are the ones that are going to make the arcade when it comes to fighting games, though. It has to be worthwhile. It can't just be give it to me, put that resource in for me because I want it. If you want it, you got to go and support it. And if you can't, it's unfortunate. I cannot as much as I want to in my current state of life. But I can say, though, that in Portland, we're lucky. We have so many community members who can and do go out to events and make them happen. It is, it's not even a question anymore. We will always have fighting game sessions in this city, and it's because the players keep supporting it. And we have venues like Epic Gaming who still support it to this day. I'm so grateful for them. They provide a place to play the fighting games. They provide a place to stream it. And they always listen to what we got to say, Now, that said, they do have a schedule, and that's good on them, because I used being that guy in the past. I let my sessions go till like 5 or 6 in the morning, but that was to my detriment. Epic Gaming does has a cap on the time. They're not going to open beyond a certain time, but that's okay, because the players, if they really want to keep playing, they can then decide themselves where to play after that for the rest of the night. But Epic Gaming makes it all possible for public, for new players to join, for new games to be put on display. And they're not even a game store. Epic Gaming is a card game store. It is it says if it's FLGS, friendly local game store, and by that they mean board games and card games. Its main game there is Magic the Gathering and Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! But they made so much room for the fighting game community, for the retro game community, and for Smash community that we're just so grateful. And does it help pay them? Yeah, it does. But they didn't have to do it, and they did do it. And their staff helps with the stream. The owner is very passionate about helping everyone get their stream set up and going pretty good. So yeah, I'm so grateful for them. It's kind of our main arcade nowadays. And so, but now we have a Round One in Vancouver, which is across the river from Portland. But they're not going to replace the Epic Gaming, but Epic Gaming doesn't replace Round One either. They're two sides of what we love about arcades. So arcades are super important, and yeah, this was a very rambly, unfocused discussion while I was driving through traffic. But I hope you guys enjoy Story Times with Chanchai. Maybe that's what I should call it. I'm still going to call it Chanchai's Worldview. But actually in Portland, a lot of players refer to my rambles as Story Time with Chanchai. But because it was so unfocused, I think I should call it there, and next time do a more focused one. But I hope you guys enjoyed this time with me while I was driving. And, you know, in the comments section, I'd like you to put anything from the things I would really love to see in the comments section. If you tell me about your arcade experience or your favorite arcade, you can limit it. But say something about the arcade scenes that you love or what you think. That's one thing I'd love to see on the comment section. Another thing, shoot me more questions. I will put them in my notes, or topics, questions, topics, anything you're curious about. It could be about Virtua Fighter. It could be about a movie, but I'm not going to talk about any movie I have not seen, and I don't get much time to see many now. But you could also talk about arcade sticks and arcade controllers, because that is my passion right now. Virtua Fighter and arcade controller parts are my top passions at the moment, outside of, you know, my children and family. So, anyways, feel free to subscribe, feel free to like, but I really would love to see comments if you have any about anything you're curious about. It could be very random, and I'll just put it on the list of topics to talk about, and I'll try to make it more focused next time. But also, if you want, talk about the arcade experiences you loved. What do arcades mean to you? Because we're a community, and what everybody thinks matters, and what everyone experiences and would love to share in their wealth of experience matters. Thank you very much. Everyone have a good one. Thank you.